Welcome, new guys. New guys. I got two new guys. Todd, you've been to one last year, huh? Did you come last year? No? Todd's new. Sweet. Um, this is a different one, and I was hoping we have more guys here because I want your panel to outnumber you guys. But so let me explain why we're doing a panel. I did it in the email, but I want to make sure you guys understand. I wanted a panel to talk about this topic because I want us to recognize that this is a delicate topic and a topic that requires a lot of nuance. And it's one where we can get into a habit, we can fall into the trap of absolutes. So if you don't do this, you're doing it wrong. Or if you do this, you're absolutely doing it wrong. And I think there are some things there, but the topic is much more gray than it is black and white. There are some things you absolutely should not do, and I think we can all agree on some of those things. But when we get into issues like corporal punishment, timeout, talking through things, the various methods of discipline, those are hazy things that can often depend on the particular parent, the particular kid, the history between an individual parent and kid. Like, I might even discipline a kid differently than my wife would because of the relationship that's there. There's just too many variables for me to get up and say, if you are spanking your kid, you are doing it wrong. Or if you are not spanking your kid, you are doing it wrong. So I've already primed the guys that are going to be talking today. Like, you're not going to hear a lot of that today. You're not going to hear, here's what you absolutely need to be doing, because I don't think that exists. What I want to focus on is principles. What principles do we put in place to govern how we do this thing? That's going to carry us farther through the baby stages. We got some baby stage guys, and soon to be more baby stage guys. And then we've got the guys with teens. That's like, all right, so what does this look like when some of these other things I've been doing aren't really feasible anymore? So I picked three specific guys for a reason to come up and talk to us. I'll grab my phone because it has my questions on it. And I'll intro you guys, and you can walk up one at a time like celebrities, like the rock stars you are. So the first, when I knew I wanted to talk about this topic, the first person I was like, I absolutely need this person on a panel was Brian Roboski. He was my number one draft pick. No offense to the other guys. And I will tell you why. So Brian's been working in, how long have you guys been fostering kiddos?
I stopped counting years, like, right after Hurricane Katrina.
Okay, so about 17 years now, 16, 17 years. And one interesting thing about foster care, so Angèle and I, my wife and I, are starting this process ourselves, is that you can't use corporal punishment when you do foster care. It is not allowed. And so if you have been doing that, you would need to figure out new ways of discipline. There's also a lot of training emphasis in the foster care world about how to take into account a kid's experience as you discipline and as you help them to grow. To realize that kids come from hard places sometimes, and that we need to help them to grow in ways that understand that, while not using it to exclude or excuse their sin, understanding their background in a way that helps us to parent them more effectively. So that is why Brian is here, because he knows a lot about that stuff. Ronnie Sloan is next. I did tell you were coming, right, Ronnie? Ronnie, you can come up because I said your name. Ronnie, I picked because he's a military guy, right? So there we go. He sounds like that, and I can't even sound like that, and I have a degree in being loud. Ronnie is he's a dad in a blended family. So Ronnie's got two girls that he became their functional dad when they were teens. Yeah. And so how do we, in blended families, implement discipline? And not even that, how do we discipline in light of the difficulties and the nuance that's required in that situation, even as we parent our own kids from our non-blended families? How do I understand what it's going to be like? I mean, I'll have a teenage girl in just like a year and a half. How do I know what it's like to discipline a teenage girl in a way that's probably not that different from how it is when you've got a blended family situation? So that's why Ronnie's here. I want to hear his insight on that stuff. And then Mike Pell is here. And I thought about asking Mike to just teach this, but then he pushed back, and I think that was wise. Speaking of gentleness there. I got Mike here because I've talked to Mike a decent bit about discipline, and one of the things that Justin talks about in this book, and we'll get to it, is the idea that discipline doesn't just discipline our kids, but it disciplines us. And I have heard Mike's contrition and his understanding of how he's grown and changed as a dad, as a man, as a discipliner, if you will, and learned from his mistakes and from his successes in a way to kind of, because he had 2 boys and then 2 girls a little bit farther down the line, not super far, but enough to have had a little bit of a time to stop and think and reassess some things. So I've just really enjoyed hearing Mike talk about that, because the last thing I want is somebody to get up here and tell me I know how to do everything right. I don't think any of us really believe that we know how to do everything right. So I wanted Mike because I've heard from him, as well as anybody, the recognition of, hey, I've made some missteps in a few areas, and I want to, a smart man learns from his mistakes, a wise man learns from other people's mistakes. So let's learn from Mike's mistakes, and all of our mistakes, really. So anyway, so that's your crew. And I think instead of table discussions today, we may just do like Q&A. So if you guys have situational questions, I'm going to ask lots of questions, and then I might actually go sit with you guys and actually be one of like the dads down there who can't figure this thing out either. This is probably my hardest area as a dad right now. We're seeing some fruit, but the last few months for us have just been really hard. Like, how do we do this thing? Are they listening? Is there like brain functionality going on up there? Like, are they hearing me? So anyway, so that's our crew. That's our layout for the day. I want to start by asking you guys, and we can just go down the line. What did discipline look like for you guys as kids? How were you disciplined? Who did it? What did it look like? And then what did it work? Like how, what were the effects of that style of discipline? You can start, yeah.
I could start. For me, discipline most often was my dad, almost all the time. Especially as I was older and old enough to really remember it. Might have been my mom when I was younger. But kind of being raised with 2 other brothers, we pretty quickly got to the point where, when mom hit us, it didn't really hurt, and she learned that. So it was kind of wait till your dad gets home. So we kind of had the combination of the dread all day of waiting until dad got home, and then when dad got home, the belt came out. So that's kind of what it looked like for us. My dad had a belt that he kept on top of the refrigerator, and when dad got home, we kind of knew, all right, what did you do? That wasn't right? Now you know what I got to do. And, out came the belt, and that was kind of the end of it. So did it work? I would say for me, more than my 2 brothers, it worked in terms of kind of control and behavior. So it got me, I was more fearful of the belt than my brothers were, so I didn't get it quite as much. So I guess in some sense, I kind of grew up thinking, okay, that kind of worked because it got me to stop doing some of the things that I was doing. But as I thought about it more later, it didn't really get to any of the hard issues that I was dealing with. So what it really kind of led to was it looked better to my dad, but I got better at hiding stuff, so I didn't get found out as much. So I think for me, in that sense, as a kid, I felt like, it worked for me. But looking at it from a dad perspective later, and how do I deal with my kids, I realized it didn't deal with my hard issues, and it just made me kind of bury stuff and kind of come to a point where I don't want my kids to do that, because if I can't see it, then we can't really work through it together.
That's good.
For me, child of the 50s and the 60s, 5 years between me and I'm the oldest, and my brother. Mom always did the discipline. Dad was similar. When he came home, every day came home around 5. But Dad was different on the discipline. He wouldn't come in immediately and attack it. He'd wait till you get in the bathtub and catch you buck naked. And the the door would swing open, but you already knew something was coming. I would have to say I grew up in a neighborhood where no matter where you were disciplined. Okay, the village raised a child type thing. They would send you home. If you screwed up somewhere else, they would send you home. Mom would whip you, and then depending on the magnitude of things, Dad would get you when he got home. I got very little whippings from my dad, but I'm also, and I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure everybody, sometimes you had to go and get the switch type thing to be whipped with. And, you learn quickly that little thing you brought is not going to do it. You got to go back out there and find a bigger switch. Dad always used a belt. But it was about, for me, I wanted to please my parents. My parents, I knew they loved me. Again, I had 5 years, just me, but I knew they loved me. And if I did something worth being spanked, it was something that I shouldn't do. So I asked my mom about this. I didn't repeat a lot of offenses. And a lot of time it was that group thing, you get together with the friends or something, you do something you shouldn't be doing. And so you guess that parent or somebody that actually saw you, they'd send you home. They'd already called your house, type thing. Because my mom did not. She was always home when we left. She was always home when we got home, as older when we got into school. So she worked in between, if you will. And so the discipline was always pointing out what was wrong, why, and ask maybe why you did that. And many times you had no clue except for because Mike did it, and not you, Mike, but I did have a friend, Mike. Yeah, Mike, because Mike.
But Mike would have been that guy.
Mike would have been that guy, so because Mike did it, and I learned later about the heart piece because we were raised in a Christian household, so Sunday school and things like that. Once you start in elementary school and you start going to church, we understood about the right and wrong, not doing things. So discipline was not extremely heavy. However, I will share this: my brother, my aunt gave him a nickname of Satan. So, because my brother was a terror. And right now he's a missionary over in Uganda, but my brother was a terror and got whipped twice as much as I did, so.
To be fair to your brother, the Apostle Peter also got that nickname once.
Yeah.
So yeah, your dad was a pastor, right?
My dad wasn't a pastor.
He was a
He was a trustee, and it was a Methodist church, so he was a leader in the church.
Brian, were your parents believers? No, and Mike, your parents weren't believers, right? Okay. All right, Mike, what about you?
Very similar to both of these guys. Anybody in the neighborhood could get a small piece of you, and then you'd go home, and your parents got all of it.
Yeah.
Catholic school my whole life. So the Board of Education at Christian Brothers, right, or nerve pinches or whatever. But it wasn't ever like malicious, right? It was, hey, get your head out of your hootie poot, and this is what's going on, and tighten up. I think the discipline at home, the belt, and that sort of stuff, it was just a different time, man. My mom, I'll never forget, my mom went to go slap me for being disrespectful. I turned my head, and she hit my ear, it ruptured my eardrum, and she felt sick. I mean, to this day, she would be embarrassed I'd talk about it, so. But I turned my head, right, when I knew the slap was coming. And I went to the doctor, and I'll never forget, he said, "What the hell did you do?" Right? These days it'd be mandatory reporting, right? This old Jewish doctor's like, "Marie, I'm so sorry. What did he do?" So, my whole discipline, I mean, aunts and uncles would do it, and I was the one that they called that. But I wasn't malicious. I just wasn't thinking. I was just all over the map and doing stuff, and but I got a bad reputation that persists to this day with aunts and uncles, right? One in particular. So I got it a lot, right? Yelled at and hit with the belt, or aunts and uncles would be more maybe a punch or something, or something like that. So it was just different. Yeah.
So Brian, you touched on this. Looking back on that, were there things that you said, I absolutely will do this same thing as my parents with my kids, or I absolutely will not do this with my kids? Was there anything that looking at your parents' parenting and specifically in the realm of discipline made you say, yep, I need to do that, or no, I'm never going to do that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there was anything that I said I definitely will do, but I did definitely say we're not going to be doing this, big leather belt thing with the kids. So that's not to say that, especially in the early days, we didn't do some spanking, but it was never like it was for me at home as a kid with, fearing the belt. So it was much gentler, more involved process than that.
Yeah. Y'all don't all have to answer, but if you have just have thoughts. It's fine.
Well, one of the things, a part of our family structure, our household, and how things were done, expectations were set up front.
Right.
And I thought, that's something that I would do and still do, setting the expectations up front, because otherwise you get default. And default may not be exactly what you expected, so now you got to deal with it.
Right.
I call it you going fishing then, because you got to reel it back in. So setting the expectations up front was extremely important in our household, taking us as kids or me as a kid to the mall and, here's what we're going shopping, this and the other, and, it's by telling me what I was expected to do. I was a pretty good kid with that, and I would not want to embarrass my mom, or I didn't want the whipping or something like that.
Yeah, it's that expectations piece I think is important, because it's hard to hold and I don't even know that it's just to hold your kid accountable for things that they don't know that you expect of them.
Right.
Within reason, you build like I think a framework of expectations for them over time. There are times, you ever had times when like your kid does something and you're like, that was a kind of stupid that I wasn't even prepared to tell you not to do.
Yeah.
Like, I just didn't think of that as something you had to be warned against. I think of when my sister, when her girls were little, they'd get out of the van at like the grocery store and put their hands on the van just so they were safe and not run out in the parking lot, this thing. And I remember telling a story about coming around, and I think it was Sam, is licking the side of the van. And she was like, I just never thought I'd just say, don't lick the van, right? There's expectation pieces. You got to do as best you can, Mike, you have anything on that?
Can't set them all.
Yeah.
So.
No, so Ellen and I were reacting. Like, we were living together, got pregnant, right? Boom. Then we just got married, boom, pregnant again, right? And she was working night shift, I was working day shift. So we were reacting to everything. There was very little planning or thought into how we were doing it. So we did it the way that we were raised.
Right, yeah.
To do it, right?
How old are you guys, by the way?
53.
66.
50.
Okay. So you guys, I mean, Brian and Mike especially, y'all are on the, maybe even like, I might be the very tail end of the generation, of the transition between my parents did it this way, and I came out okay, or that worked for me, so I'm going to do it with my kids. Nowadays, there's a more of a trend of my parents did this, and I will never do that. You just see that shift happening. I think I'm right in that. 40 or so I'm 42, is where that switch, so the 1980s, the Gen Xers, when they started to be like, I'm not going to be like my parents, I'm going to be my own thing. All right. So now I want to move into some of the stuff from the book. Discipleship, like Justin says, discipline and discipling, you don't need to be like a linguistics scholar to put those things together. So you talked about this a little bit, Brian. The goal of discipline, of behavior modification versus discipling the heart. How does that inform, hey Dan, how does that inform the way that you guys have implemented discipline with your kids?
I pulled up a few notes. There's a few
That's
things.
fine.
I just want to try and stay on
Brian
track
and I
a
are
little
not
bit.
playing Word with Friends
A little bit
together,
too much, just so I don't ramble and kind of get off topic. But so I guess I would say I probably don't think about it as much as I would like to. But this is, I think, right now is good timing for me, just with where I am with some things right now, and the discipleship stuff this summer, and Keith's humility message. So I think that's kind of a big part of what God's trying to do in this, in me, in this season right now. So I guess big thing is my notes going haywire here. I somehow.
Are you dictating something
Yeah, somehow. So I don't know. I might have just wiped out all my notes. I'm not sure. But so I guess I want to keep more continually in front of my mind that this is a process. It is about discipleship and not this discipline is something that's somehow separated from the rest of life and the rest of, walking out life with our kids and our family. And just remembering that the end goal is that discipleship, kind of pointing them towards Christ. It's not about making sure they understand that was wrong and there's a consequence. And that's part of it. And we talked about that in the chapter, right? But that's not the biggest part of it, right? The biggest part of it is realizing that, the same way God's walking with me through this thing and shaping and pointing. So learning to try and see the end goal is pointing them towards God and understanding this in that context, right? So hope that helps.
The whole thing about the book is great and sheds light on some things that may have been thoughts, may not have been thoughts, but it does bring it to the surface. So thanks for the book in general. But the image bearer piece is what hit me with that discipline and discipleship. And as I reflect, again, my dad was an authority figure, and it wasn't never about his, embarrassing him or anything like that. But I think looking back and based on reading in the book, he was probably attempting to disciple us, but there was a way of discipline at that time that could interfere with that. And mom, usually that was enough for mom to discipline you. But if dad had to get to the point of discipline you, then it was the magnitude of whatever was done.
Yeah.
So the discipline versus discipleship, I see it now, and I'm like Brian. I'm thinking, oh, okay, that is the best way to kind of look at this, and it's not always about them. It's about the Lord working on me at that point in time, and how I may react to things. But the image bearer piece is what spoke to me.
Yeah.
What was the question again? Exactly.
The link in your mind and in your practice between discipleship and discipline.
Okay. Yeah. So in my mind today. Yeah. Okay. So I agree.
And maybe how you done. We're going to talk about how you've actually.
So I
implemented
agree. I
discipline.
agree with the one sentence in the book that really stuck out to me again was the gap between what I want and what they need.
Yes.
Right. That was the big gap. And so when I talk to other people about it privately about this, what I say now is, I feel like I transitioned from this to this.
Right.
Right. And that's been a really healthy, good transition, right? At every age, for every kid. And I think that's if you want to live this life, if you want Christ, if you want this, if you want it to go well with you, if you want the promises to come true for you, right? That you own as in Christ, then this is how it goes, right?
Yeah.
But just last night we had a thing with one of the kids where it was, my wife is reasoning, and I'm like, that's so well done. And the kid says, I don't care, that's stupid. And so,
Which kid?
so I came in and I backed up mom and I said, hey, look, this is sense. This is adulting. Welcome to adulting. This is adulting. You're leaving in X amount of years, right? You need to know this. This is how this works, right? This is it. And she said, I don't care. I just think it's dumb. And I think blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay, cool. We're done with that. Now it's a command. You will go do whatever. Because when you fail to see reason, I'm still your covering. Now it's a command. So say yes, sir, to me and tell me that you understand this is what's going to happen. And I'm going to check to make sure it happens. I thought I wouldn't have to do that anymore. And I think that's the part where I most often screwed up is like, I made sense to you and you're giving me the double bird, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm mad. And it was really good, right? Because it was just like, no, you know what? I'm just going to give you the command. And we'll deal with what happens if you don't do the command. I'm not going to try to break you to my will. Right. I'm just going to do this. And I think that's been the big change. Like, you're responsible for your actions. You're going to do this, and I'm going to hold you accountable for them. I'm not going to control the outcome.
Yeah, it's like that
right?
that shift from when they're babies to when they're teens of you're always an authority, but you're moving more from like authoritarian to influencer in their lives.
Or you try.
You try to, but every once in a while it's like, I still need to grab this because I still am your authority and I still am responsible for you as much as you're growing in responsibility for yourself, Ronnie, I love what you said about the image bearer thing too. My wife and I were just talking about this yesterday or 2 days ago as I was talking about this topic in the panel, just the idea that like my kids are image bearers and it's so easy for us to think of them as extensions of ourselves. Yeah. And we think about the things that they do, like this kid's sin problem in this area. We think about it in light of how it affects us instead of how it affects them as an individual image bearer who, hopefully, ideally, will be here long after I'm dead and gone. It's like, no, you're a person, and I need to parent you like a person, like a human being who bears the image of God,
I was just going to say that's really good. It's important to not forget. It's really easy to kind of think about how that impacts us and our thoughts or how other people look at us or whatever, but just realize, I think most of you guys I'm looking at here have more than one kid, so they're not all the same, right?
Yeah.
And as much as we want people to treat us like people, sometimes it's easy to forget that with our kids when we're, like Mike was talking about, because we want this outcome and we're not really thinking about that per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, just my daughters are 39, not married. I've said this before, but they'll throw this in my face all the time. And it's not, anything bad, but they'll say, they still come under my headship because they're not married and, they say that, and that draws me back into reality real quick sometimes because I don't always think about it that way. But that whole image bearing, and they still count on things that they're still looking to me as a model.
Right.
Even at 39, and I enjoy that, but they'll throw that headship thing out. And one thing, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, one of your daughters, I don't know which one because I wasn't even there, but Celeste says, I saw Mike spend some time with his daughter somewhere in this church, and I don't know what was going on, but she had tears in her eyes, and you came to her, and that's what Celeste was telling me. How you lovingly came to your daughter, possibly in a time of need. She didn't know what was going on, but I'm just sharing that with you because she saw that.
Yeah. Side piece on this is I feel like we can all have the same tendency to do this with our spouses as well. We view their struggles, and this was a game changer for me in terms of marriage, was realizing that like my wife is a person. She's not my wife specifically. She's first an image bearer, and when she's struggling with a sin issue that affects me, its effect on me is not primary, and she's probably more frustrated with it than I am. And just being like, when I make this about me, I make her about me instead of making her about her and her walk with the Lord and her own growth and sanctification. So that's free. It has nothing to do with parenting, except probably a lot to do with parenting. So Brian, you mentioned that you have spanked your kids. I just want... Nothing these gentlemen are about to say here, I'm going to say this again, is a mandate or a prohibition. They are not, because they're probably going to differ on some of these things, and that's why there's more than one of us here. How do you discipline your kids? How have you disciplined your kids? How has that changed over time?
I think, as Nick said earlier, I think some of this started to shift for us as we were foster parents. Like I said, we tried to do it, I would say, lovingly, and I mean, just like the rest of everybody else, and never did any of it perfectly at any stage. But we're forced, in a way, to rethink some of that more so when we started having, foster kids in the home and weren't allowed to spank them and all. So it kind of forced us to reevaluate that, whether we, wanted to or not. And for us, it was a good thing because it really made us kind of, think about not just some new ways to kind of help, walk them through that, but also kind of gave us some different perspective over the years of seeing it happen. So, as Nick said, since, 2006 or so, it's been a lot of kids over the years. So, anyway, so I guess we kind of transitioned from that model of, okay, let's, whenever possible, try and get them in a private spot, kind of sit them on the lap and sit down and talk through this, and sometimes involved a spanking, sometimes didn't. transitioning more to kind of, all right, let me see if I can first figure out what the need is here, which is something I totally didn't really do in the early days. Terry was probably better at this than me, which is true generally in life, Jose. But so I didn't really see that. But especially with these kids coming in with all kind of different broken needs, and just, they're all so different, so much stuff that we didn't have a clue what was going on. It kind of became more readily apparent that, hey, before I try and address this tantrum or this scream, whatever's going on, let's see if we can figure out what it is that this child needs right now, more than what I want, like some peace and quiet. And so that kind of transitioned us into kind of, all right, let me see if I can kind of pause and listen here, trying to evaluate what's going on and see if we can meet needs. So part of that was here's a good example was, this was much later, but came into play, some with the foster kids, but a lot with Bree, because she kind of had some special needs, some health issues and stuff. But realize that sometimes the kids aren't physically capable of behaving. Like, for instance, with Bree, a lot of times there was a food issue. If she hadn't, had enough food, she could, go off the deep end real quick, and it could get, real ugly real fast. And I'm thinking, like, what happened? This kid was just fine a minute ago. What happened in that split second that sent her from this smiling, happy little kid to off the deep end, and we can't rein her in? And we had to learn over time that this kid hasn't eaten in 3 or 4 hours. Like, she needs, some steady diet. She needs to have water. She needs to be hydrated. She needs to have food. So, just being aware of things like that we all need. Like, who doesn't get grumpy if you miss lunch and all of a sudden it's 4 o'clock and you haven't eaten anything since 6 o'clock in the morning?
It makes you feel so stupid when you think about that and realize that it took you time to figure that out. Like, 'cause I had the same thing. It's like,
right.
Yeah, I know what I like. I get hangry.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
If you haven't eaten and it's been a few hours and now you're like grumpy, okay, like, you're a person.
You're right. Yeah. It should be a normal thought, but it wasn't obvious to me, right? So hopefully that'll help somebody else too.
That's good.
But part of it too, I think, and this was just being more aware. He talked a little bit. I don't know if you guys, if you don't have kids that have had trauma, may not have recognized some of his kind of subtle language about upstairs brain and things like that. But that's kind of getting to the heart of that. So when kids get in that mode, it kind of puts them in another spot where they're like physically not capable. Their brain can kind of go into this fight or flight response. And it's not just foster kids. It could, any of us can deal with that. So like the food issue is just a human thing, right? So just to say that sometimes their bodies and their minds can get in this state where that kid is capable of understanding what you're saying, but maybe in that moment they're not, because they're in this fight or flight mode, and they're hearing the words, but they're not really hearing you. It's not really connecting. And so some of it is getting them what they need to be able to get in a spot where you can have that discussion and kind of help them get to the next stage. So that might be making sure they have some food. It might be making sure they have some water. Sometimes if you've got not just younger kids, but especially with younger kids, having a little cup with like a straw in it that they can suck on, because even just that sucking motion for them is kind of calming, like, babies with pacifiers and things like that. So just little things like that could kind of help them calm down, get out of that fight or flight, and relax a little bit so that you guys can kind of move on. It doesn't necessarily need to be a discipline thing, like in, a correction, I would say, kind of thing, as much as let me just help them get what they need so they're not just out of sorts. And it takes care of itself. It's not a matter of, hey, let me tell you why that was wrong. It's just, let me help you get your needs met so your body and your mind aren't out of whack, kind of thing. And so sometimes even something as simple as not matching them and kind of reacting to their big reaction and just whispering kind of makes them, oddly enough, kind of forces them to kind of focus in a little bit different way and can kind of snap them out of it sometimes. So sometimes just some little things like that to not really try and correct, but just recognize that, oh, maybe I missed this clue, but here, let's try and kind of fix that.
It's like they talk about like the fire triangle of like heat, fuel, and oxygen. Sometimes it's a matter, instead of like bringing something into the situation, like I had one kid who was an epic tantrumer, and instead of fighting fire with fire. Sometimes you just like, you try to suck as much energy out of the situation as possible. Be like, I love you too much to fight with you about this right now. You know, that could be huge. What about you, Ronnie? How have you done discipline as you came into these girls' lives? How old were they when you married Celeste?
They were 14.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Discipline was always Celeste's deal. Ronnie could give them a look, you know, a look of disappointment. I don't think I've ever used a term, and they can verify. I don't think I ever said I'm disappointed in you. Actually said the words. Probably had a look, but that was a part of it also. The presence and what the household stands for, I think it was an important piece to me. I have nieces and nephews that I was around, and they would get away with things or try to do things behind their parents' back, and Uncle Ronnie was not the discipliner, but I would give them that look or tell them, you know that ain't what you're supposed to be doing, right? And they would snap out of it really quickly. But you're right about the trauma-induced piece to it. I think my girls, there was a certain amount of trauma. It wasn't negative trauma, but being raised by a single parent all that time, and not knowing where ends were going to meet, there was some roughness in the life during that time. So, and they were always first for Celeste. So she was highly disappointed when they did some things, and I remember when we were dating, her and Diane got into it, and they were standing in the garage, and I came over, and I'm walking up to them, and all of a sudden the mood changed, and there was no fight between the two of them, and they kind of went to their separate corners, and I had no clue what was going on, but the point is I showed up, and it was done. And so the girls would always look at it like that. If Dad's disappointed in you, one quick funny one was about Diane and her prayer life. She was praying, I don't know, maybe for grace over dinner or something one time, and later on I said, you know, that prayer has never changed, and that killed her because she was praying the same prayer all the time. My expectation is that's a 5, 6, 7-year-old prayer, and you're still praying, you know, and that's all I said. But she'll tell you today that like cut her to the core, and she had to think about, well, what am I doing in my prayer life, and it made her refocus, if you will. But you know, I was just being Ronnie. You know, that's the same prayer. Yeah. You know, and I just walked away. So.
Yeah, so for me, what really came to me about this, I said this in a men's group a while back with some guys. I said, my boys had a different dad than my girls have. Yeah. Thank God. Yeah. And so, and the scripture that I'm always reminded of, and the Lord was reminding me of it right here just now, was, and now I can't make, where a man lacks vision, who be unrestrained, right? And so for discipline, right, my encouragement to all of you, right, and to myself, is you don't begin a business or a venture or anything else without a plan, right? Right. So we shouldn't even think about touching our kids unless we have a plan, right? That's I mean, if you didn't think about it before it happened, because it's coming, right? You're going on this trip. You're going to pack for the trip. You're going to plan for the trip. With the boys, Elle and I were very reactive. The very first book somebody gave us on discipline was Shepherding a Child's Heart, which was pretty much beat their butt like a drum for every infraction. Terrible. Terrible. I'm sure that wasn't his intention, but literally before my boys left home, they wanted to know, why were you and Mom so angry with us? Right? It was painful, right? It was painful. So with the girls, I couldn't bring myself to spank the girls, right? So for them, it was verbal, but it was still very harsh because I was reacting, right, to a lot of stuff. And, but, you know, again, with the boys now, as they went through college and stuff, it's been a lot better. You have more vision of, I want you to be a healthy man, a right man. I need to repent where I need to repent, right, from the spanking stuff, and I have on my knees. it's coaching, right?
Yeah.
It's developing the person. It's doing, I need you to own it. I need you to make the decision, and then I need you to own the consequences, right? And so for I didn't have any vision before. I have more vision now. I hope to have a hell of a lot more by the time I have grandkids. But the big thing is, I heard a coach say this once, listen to me with your eyes. He said this to the baseball team. And I was like, that's good.
Yeah.
And so I think with the kids, it's listen to me with your eyes. So do you hear me? Do you see me? Right? And he said this in this book too.
Yeah.
I see you. Do you see me? Like I see your sin. I see your foolishness. I see your rebellion. I see you're worried that I'm disappointed. Like I acknowledge all this is going on. And this is true. Right? And this is the truth. And I'm telling you, whether you like it or not, and I hope you see it, this is true. Right?
Yeah.
And getting out of the house has been helpful too. So when I had to have my big talks, like with the boys told me, you did terrible in the little things. Right? You did terrible in the little things. But the first time you caught me looking at porn, I thought you were going to smash the computer over my head. And instead you took me for a walk. And the first time you caught me taking too long in the bathroom, right? You said, hey, bud, let's go for a walk, right? Let's talk about it. Girl stuff, right? And I think that's just the grace of God that the big things that they thought, this is the nuclear option, Dad's going to burn it down, was more like, man, I get that.
Yeah,
right? I totally get that, right? Let's go talk about it. And as an encouragement, the sweetest thing with my boys was this. When I took them to talk about these big things, and we got done sitting on the levee, kind of just looking out at the lake and talking about it, when we got up, they hugged me. And I had to tighten them up, but I had to tell them about it. And I had to tell them scripturally, this is what that is and what it looks like. They hugged me. I'm like, thanks, Dad. And to this day, they're grateful for that.
That's good.
Right? So for the girls, I think, we try to do more of that. But the difference, I think, with girls is moms and girls have the tangle.
Yeah.
Right? And as a dad, the challenge in disciplining daughters when they're in the tangle with the wife is, when you enter this fray, one girl's going to be mad at you. Yes. Is it the one you sleep next to?
Yes.
Or is it the other one?
Yes.
And I mean, I'm saying, because you're trying to parse, look, I mean, I see her point.
Someone's going to have to talk about this in therapy. Am I going to have to be there or not is the question. Yeah.
I'm like, I got to tell you the truth. Like, I'm not involved in this. I'm looking at this. I love you both, and here's the thing. So with the girls, it's been a little more different than that, where some of my discipline talking to goes through, hey, Elle, I know you all have these heart talks, these big, long talks, right? Might I recommend
Right, yeah.
this, right? Because, and she's like, okay.
Right.
Not abdicating my role, right? Because I took the girls on a daddy-daughter trip recently. I've never done that. Highly recommend it. And it was rich.
Yeah.
Right? And it was good, and it was safe and fun, and all that.
Right.
And the correction that I had to do along the way was they couldn't turn around and go, Mom, Dad. They were like, it's just me and you. And I was like, yeah, we're having the talk. So,
Yeah.
whatever. So, yeah, I mean, the vision thing, I would say, is a huge thing. I had no business raising my kids without I thought about these things. I pondered and spent time on the biggest investment I'm ever going to make.
Right. And I think that touched something that Ronnie said as well. I like the business model kind of metaphor there. And you wouldn't write a business model with like one page that's like corrective action, right? You would, and I think we're talking about like those quote unquote disciplined moments, the moments we were spanked or the timeouts or whatever those things were for us or for our kids. But that's such a small part of discipline. And that's what I think that discipline discipling thing there. It's like, man, I need to be an influence over you all the time so that you know where this is coming from when things do come to a head. And also what you said, Ronnie, this sort of like team element. Like this is one of the things that we're working really hard with our kids on trying to communicate. And I think it's going to help us in some ways when we have a foster kid in the house. It's like, hey, we're all part of a team on a mission together. Is what you're doing right now furthering the mission, or is it furthering what you want? and can I help you figure out your place in the mission here, and let's get in the same direction again, because that's huge. I mean, when you're all pulling against each other, because my littlest member of my family is the biggest personality of my family, and he can set the tone for the entire house real quick. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes it is exactly what we need. But sometimes I need him to be like, all right, bud, I need you part of the team here because I need you working with us in that regard, For those of you who have the book, on page 73, Justin starts this kind of bright orange section. I love the orange in this book, by the way. These kind of wrong instincts. And our reactions to them. So they're doing this on purpose, and then we respond with anger directed at them. This is an insult to me personally. Responded with bitterness and revenge. There's nothing wrong. They mean the best. We dismiss and ignore. They just misunderstood. They can be reasoned with. The problem is education. So we respond with useless words. Some of y'all, how many of y'all felt personally attacked in some of these? I want them to feel pain and shame for what they've done. Then they'll learn. So we respond with revenge or abuse. I'm frustrated and exhausted. I need to assert control to get the right result as fast as possible. Then we do the impatient behavior management thing. I could do this right if it weren't at this moment. This moment is really inconvenient. This happens more the more kids you have. Then you abdicate the role entirely. And the last one he has, and there are others, I'm embarrassed and I need to manage my reputation here. And we respond with self-conscious behavior management. For you guys, any of those jump out at y'all as dads? Like, what your tendencies are? I know mine, but what are you guys' tendencies? Where do your instincts go haywire in these?
Yeah, so maybe it's probably best if I first say I think I can relate to all of those things.
Yeah,
but
truth.
There's probably some truth to all of that and a little bit in all of us. But the first things that came to mind for me were those first two. Like, you did it on purpose, and you did it as a personal assault to me personally. So yeah, God's been kind of dealing with me in some of that lately, and making some of that stuff not about me, right? The whole process is about me, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, and God discipling us. But that part of it, my part in helping you to see what's going on, with that event and why you did that and what's going on in your heart, that part of it's not really about me as much as it is trying to help you see you and help you see God and that relationship. So I could relate to that and the reaction that I have when something happens and it doesn't go the way that I want, and you did that again, or you did that, to make sure that I felt a certain way, or you got a certain reaction from me, or whatever. God's been dealing with me, and I need to not make that about me. So that's because it does kind of lead me to let me try and fix that, or I'll show you. You're going to do that to me. Here's what I'm going to do to you. That's the thing that I don't want in me, right? That's right. Because that's not when I've failed in those areas. I've reacted in that way, and you guys can probably relate to this if you've done the same thing. What doesn't come is that important reconciliation process that Justin talked about in the book. So if I see someone walking away dejected or downcast, then I know I didn't do that right. And sadly for me, I've spent way too much time over the years kind of justifying why it was okay for me to be angry, feigning, righteous anger, but it was really more just about my sin. So, just being real, it's like I'm trying to listen to him better and see, and, from that reaction, if it's not that hug and the smile or the wink that Justin was talking about, and it's I'm looking down or I'm kind of slumped over, then I didn't do something right there, and we got to fix that.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. The first two, big for me. And I read a book on men in anger, and one of the things they said is the biggest issue you have is the ascribing of motives, right? It's a narrative. That person cut me off. Maybe they really did miss their turn, and they just cut me off, right?
Like you did every time. You
You
never did it because you're a jerk.
Or they were just such a jerk, they got stuck in the middle and they blocked me for 2 cycles of the light or whatever, right? Because the next person did too. And I think what's helpful, right, when I remember this, is to eliminate the conditions under which I will act biblically.
That's good.
If only you all would if everybody would if we could just leave on the trip on time, if I could just come home from work one day and not have you in my ear about everything they did, and now they must pay, fine, everybody's going to pay. Right, that sucks, right? That's terrible. And eliminating the condition under which I will act like a Christian, I think, for me, is huge. I got to take that away. Nobody is ever just this side of heaven. I don't get to come home from work and I don't have a blank check to have my day because I had a rough day at work. It better be good at home. What an unrealistic, sinful expectation, right? And I think that attitude then lends itself to you just knew this was going to tick me off. So, right? And that's just terrible, right?
Yeah.
So those, the ascribing of motives, that has really helped to say. And the other thing is, I would just let it slide, right? A little stuff like, let's just he overlooks the transgression. No, dude, you're parenting. Forget that. Get it now, nip it now, right?
Yeah.
And just say, hey, bud, you need to stop. Here's why, right? You've been warned, you've been told, you need to stop. And instead of letting it get to the point where you're like, that's it, because that's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, those are some of the I don't even remember the exact question.
No, you're right. I want to, first of all, that eliminating the conditions in which I'll act biblically, shut it down, take it home, guys. That is, no offense to the other guys. I'm going to walk away thinking that and meditating on that today. But to give a little bit of redemption to shepherding a child's heart, that's one of the things that he talks about there is, Ted Tripp does, is if you make the line for correction or addressing an issue just when it irritates you enough, then all you've taught them is to base their morality off of what bothers other people instead of something that's fixed. And we train them, it's okay. And then you're like, why'd you do that? And you're like, well, you didn't say anything the first time. Like, I didn't know it was a problem last time I did that. If so, maybe you should have said it. And that's the tension there and the confusion we bake into them because they're like, if I can't be consistent, then how do I help them to be consistent, like you said, and always base my actions not on what's going on around me in the situational, but on what God would call me to do in that moment, What about you, Ronnie?
Well, Michael, both of them have said it, but it's about waiting until it gets up to here. It's too late as far as I'm concerned. You got to start early on, and you got to be consistent in things. So that's what I found. Again, presence is an important word in my vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's setting the stage for things before it gets to that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the most important piece.
Yeah, I'll attest. Let
me ask you one thing. What's the last one? I think the last one I
was, your reputation.
Yes, that one.
I don't have one of those, so it's fine.
And I think we didn't have these real concerns, but it's like that out in public versus private thing.
Yeah.
Okay, out in public, it tarnishes your reputation, and there's still a child or a student or a person there, an image bearer of the Lord that you've got to be concerned about. So it's not about me, it's about the Lord, and through the Lord, it's about you. And that was a big one for me to think about that last one there, reputation.
My big one is, I think what I act most in is the reasoning, the long, useless talks. I swear, because it's been quite a while, I think, since I've spanked my kiddos, and I'll take away some privileges and things like that. But man, I swear there's times when I'm talking, and it's like half an hour, and they're just looking at me, please just beat me.
Yes.
Please,
yes.
please, can you just spank me and we can all go about our day, because this is torture. It's like Chinese water torture.
Get it over.
That is my tendency, because man, if I can just reason with you, but that's the other thing. Sometimes, man, sin refuses to be reasoned with, and we need to realize that we're dealing it is. I think we get out of balance in our parenting when we chalk it all up to trauma, or chalk it all up to reason, or chalk it all up to a malicious motive, and not realize, like, just like us, they are a complex mixture of all of those things. They have needs, which they were hungry, but they also felt infringed upon and had a sinful response that wasn't regulated well because of their hunger, or contributed to by their hunger. And they also snapped at you in a way that was partly sinful and partly the fact that they didn't understand something. It's just complex. Like, that's the nature of the beast. And if our parenting and our discipline specifically is too monotone, too one size fits all you have is a hammer, so everything's a nail, that's when you're going to get out of balance and probably out of bounds and just be ineffective, honestly.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, because it kind of plays into what Michael said. You have those little moments, right? And then you have some bigger ones that do need some of those little bit longer discussions. I probably have had too many times they're kind of somewhere in between that.
Right.
Stop it, and 30-minute discussion. But for me, and even, especially for younger kids, but even as they get older, even a 5-minute discussion or a 2-minute discussion can be too long, So sometimes maybe just think about, like, we've got some little short phrases like, hey, if I say, no hurts, then you're not going to go hit your brother. Or if I say this, we know we're on the same page. Just so it's something quick, but it's one of those consistent messages, kind of to what Ronnie said, this is what we're about as a family, or this is what we're working on right now. This is what we're going to pay some attention to. But just something quick, so it's a quick reminder for them. It's easy, you got it, and it's not an ongoing, this long discussion, because I can see that with the kids too. It's like, wait a minute. You can sit there for 20 minutes with so-and-so saying, what you doing? Nothing. What you doing? Nothing. Okay. What you doing now? Nothing. And that's okay. But if I get past like 20-second mark, I can see them kind of shutting down. So sometimes some of those things just do need to be quick. Like, let's work on some things that are just super quick. You get the point and we're done. And that's all it has to be, just a kind of a quick reset.
One thing you did say, though, Mike, that I was thinking, I do this, my wife and I do this, but I've never done this with my kids, and I probably need to start implementing it. Statistically speaking, there's just scientific studies showing this, like, conflict resolution happens better when you're walking than when you're sitting still. There is something about, instead of we're stuck here together looking at each other, to we're making progress. We're walking someplace together. Psychologically, that does things. And so when my wife and I, we don't have big fights really, but if we get to a point where we feel kind of stuck, or like we're kind of talking past each other and not seeing each other's perspective well, which we've grown in over the days of marriage, it's helpful for us to be like, all right, our neighborhood is a loop. Like, we have a single loop that is our neighborhood. It's about 2/3, 3/4 of a mile, and we'll just walk. I was like, hey, let's go for a walk. Our kids are old enough now where we can just leave them and be like, all right, let's just walk around the loop one time. Let's just talk through this on a walk. And I think I need to start implementing that with my kids more. Like, all right, let's just go do the loop or do the levee. Let's go someplace. Let's just get out of here and let's change our environment.
So real quick, if I may,
go.
to that, right, to tee off of that. I don't do well when I feel trapped. And if you put me in a single place and we can't move and I can't gesticulate, or I start my fight or flight, really, and it's an observation I've noticed about myself. I really start to feel trapped. You put me outside in a big open area where we can move around a little bit, adjust my position, talk or whatever, it's a better experience for everybody. I'm just calmer, right?
Throw a ball.
I feel like I can breathe. Yeah, I mean, I can do that. So that's one. Two, and so the fear thing in discipline is terrible. The other thing is, what I would encourage y'all, if you get around other people that make you feel like your kids are crappy, right? Like their parenting is on par, and you just feel terrible around them. Brian witnessed me do this years ago. We were hanging out with a group of people. There's somebody that really was just down on my kids, and I just ruined their New Year's Eve. All I had to do was say, "Oh, that's it. Give me this. We're done. That's it." And that was your consequence. But they were older Christians, and man, I just so wanted them to be okay with where we were as young. And we got in the car that night. When we left, I told my wife, I'm done. I'm done with this couple as people we spend time with. I'm done with everything. Our kids are the bad kids. Even if our kids were together doing stuff, they're the bad kids. Every single time, right? And I said, I do not wish to have this friendship anymore at all. And we did. And man, whoo, all of a sudden my wife and I got along better. We realized we fought when we were around them, that we felt judged all the time we were around them. And I was like, okay, I'm so glad that ended. But I overparented my kids whenever I was around them.
Because you're trying to meet standards,
'Cause
meet that
I'm
reputation
trying-
piece that Ronnie was talking about.
And so out of fear, right, and their disappointment, I was overparenting, Ellen was overparenting, and we'd leave everything like, these dang kids. And it wasn't. It was those dang people. and it was our dang fear of not measuring up. And so just if you find yourself in that situation, man, that's not healthy for your kids. I don't care how much you like those people. Get away from them, right? Just go. Your kids are your priority, not those people. Right?
Yeah.
And just that as an encouragement, we found that a couple of times where you gravitate to the answer people, you like them, right? They're easy. But if your kids just can't ever measure up, man, run.
Yeah. One last thing on this point of instincts. A rule of thumb I tend to live by, whether it's with regard to my kids or my wife or anybody. I like to know my instincts and know myself well, and know that I'm probably out of balance in that direction, and know to push off of that and lean in the other direction. So if my tendency is to fly off the handle, then I need to know that's probably my tendency. And so if I'm going to stop and think about this for a minute, like if I have the time and self-control to think about it, push away from anger, because they're going to get enough of that as just like law of averages type stuff, right? If my tendency tends to be to let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go, then if I stop to think about it, let me make sure I get intentional about it in this moment, because I probably won't next time, because I just know myself. I think that just healthy understanding of who you are as a human being and your tendencies, your imbalances, your weaknesses helps you to parent if you're just aware of them and you just take them into consideration with how you respond to things. Before we do a Q&A, I want to talk about this pyramid of discipline that he's got, and these, where we get into the habits portion of this. He's got this bedrock of loving authority, just the habit of establishing that. And then he's got these kind of five what's I'm looking for? Concurrent pyramid elements here of pausing, praying, practicing good body language, understanding, and applying consequences. And then he gets to confession and reconciliation, which is the goal. And I love that, kind of what y'all were talking about. The goal is, I want to walk out of here. We have to do life with each other when we walk out of this room, or when we're done walking around the block or whatever we're doing. How do we get to that goal? And starting with that, with knowing the right foundation and knowing the right goal, I think helps us with some of the other habits. Which of these other habits, and I'm kind of really looking at those middle five, but maybe even the other ones too, would you say you've done an especially good job as a dad at, and which ones would you say are hard for you?
Loving authority. That's the one thing that I, probably because of the situation, knowing that there was no man in their lives,
Right.
I wanted that whole love thing, and that's just the way I approached it. I've got to make sure that they understand that I love them.
Yeah.
When the Lord gave them to me, I remember the laughter I had. That's not just one woman, that's three women. And, it's like the Lord's paying me back for some of the crap I did in the past or something. So that's the way I look at it.
You like women, Ronnie?
Here's three.
Here you go.
Here's three. But I just, the hugs, the kisses, all that, that loving authority piece was there. But what I got out of that was that whole reconciliation piece. I don't know, I could probably count, if I think back hard enough, maybe one or two times, but did I carry the reconciliation piece through? And what I mean is, you can express disappointment, you can discipline or whatever, but did I carry that part through? Because that part's important. Or did I just let it kind of sort of slide in default reconciliation?
Right.
If I'm talking to you now and I haven't talked to you in the last 3 hours, then everything's okay now. So that was a piece for me.
Yeah, thinking about the successfully part is a hard one for me, because I think I'm kind of more. So I think I'd maybe reframe that a little bit. But I think kind of one thing that came to my mind of one of the areas where I think kind of saw the most benefit was when we came to the realization that there's a lot of value in. He talked about having kids apologize and stuff, but we found a lot of value in going to them and say, I've blown it. This wasn't about you. This was my sin, and I'm asking you to forgive me. Those moments for us have been good with the kids in terms of just, I think, hopefully modeling for them in a way that, look,
Right.
I still need this too. This isn't just about me correcting, trying to fix you. God's still trying to fix me. And I think hopefully it kind of helps make this a little bit more relatable for them, to help them understand what we're talking about in that discipleship process, right? That God's still working on me. So I think those times have been, when I've been able to be humble enough and do that, we have seen, benefits with the kids. I would say the hardest for me, what I'm trying to kind of work through with the Lord's help the most now, is this to pause and pray kind of hand in hand.
Right.
Because where I find myself with the most difficulty is when I react, kind of like Mike was talking about, and I don't take the time to stop and, okay, let me kind of get myself out of the fight or flight and the reaction that I want to have because of that offense that you just did against me that I was talking about earlier. Let me kind of get myself right. And Lord, even where I think I've got it right, I probably don't. So can you kind of help adjust my heart before we go into this thing and get me in the right place so that I can help get them in the right place? So that kind of, I appreciate when he said in the book, like sometimes that little pause is more for me than it is for them. I think for me, sometimes that's true. If I can slow myself down a little bit and pause, then hopefully that kind of leads to a better result in the end.
Yeah, that part he talks about like, remind me that I am also this way often. Like, my child is upset because he's not getting what he wants. Remind me that I'm that way too.
Right, that was good.
Again, just the realization that, like, on the scale of morality or godliness, if God's here and my kid is here, I might be here, right? Like, God is so other than me and my kid, and I am way more like my kid, only with years of practicing either genuinely controlling it or masking it. But inside, I look so much like them, and so much need to grow in looking like God. I think that helpful is like, all right, this is a you, not against us, but if we drew the lines about similarity, it's God and it's us. How do we walk together in this, And even sometimes when you're correcting kids, saying, hey, I have a hard time with this too. Even if it's not like something you've sinned against them, just be like, man, I know what this is like. You're envious of your friend who's got this. I'm envious of my friends who have more stuff than I have. And it doesn't trust God, or wherever you go with that. But, whatever it is, but just really helping them to see, you know what, man, we're in the same boat, you and I. Yeah. We are in the same boat, in the same creek, and we are trying, with the Lord's help, to model ourselves after him and to grow in his image and his likeness.
Yeah, that's really good. I think the key thing with the Lord's help, because sometimes it's one thing to recognize that and see that in me, and I don't know about if you guys can relate to this or not, but sometimes if the sin that I'm seeing right now in them is the same thing that I know is in me, then I don't know, sometimes it doesn't produce in me the compassion that it should. Sometimes it's like kind of a guilt, regret. It's like, oh man, did I do that? And what I'm trying to do better at is see the grace of God in these things, realizing he knows I'm not perfect, right? He knows this whole process. And don't want us to get in a spot where we're just feeling so guilty that, hey, I did. I mean, none of us are going to get all this right? But not put all of the weight on this, right? I mean, if we didn't have the hope of Savior, none of us would be sitting in here in this room together talking about this stuff, right? We'd just be out there with the rest of the world trying to figure out what the latest book says and go do it, right? But not to kind of carry the weight and the guilt of that and let that, expand and enlarge my reaction to something, but to help me see the grace of God and how he kind of reacts to me in that.
Yeah. But you guys, what of the habits have y'all seen? Sorry, we diverged from that topic for a second. Sorry, that was my fault.
So there's two where I would say improvement. I've mastered none. But the pause is something that I think my baby girl has helped me the most with, and actually Jacob too. So the front and the back,
the bookends.
Jake's most like me, just stumbling through life like loud, and getting in all kind of trouble and stuff. And to come back to something, when you see that and you know what happens with that, then fear takes over, and I disciplined out of fear with him.
Oh, that's good.
Which was terrible. I never wanted to be treated that way. But I
Right.
figured I can drive this out of him. I can drive me out of my son. You can't. It's stupid. So that. But then the pause has been, and they've helped me. Is the little one will go, Dad, you're hangry. Like, yeah, I can see it in you look drawn, you look whatever, and I'm like, I am. And she's like, you are, because she gets that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's helpful to know, yeah, or Ellen will say, hey, babe, you got a lot going on at work right now? Is this or is this that? And I'm like, oh, this is that. You know,
Yeah.
There's the pause, acknowledging where am I right now as I'm about to, and I wish I did this better, as I'm about to speak, as I'm about to exercise God-given authority, where am I? Right?
Yeah.
The same question God asked Adam and Eve, right? Where
Right,
am I now?
yeah.
Oh, where am I right now? Not in a good spot, so I don't need to be saying anything right now, right?
Yeah.
So the pause is helpful. 2, the acknowledging that I'm like them. I had this conversation the other day. So Jacob's about to leave for the military. His life's dream, special forces. You got to have this level of everything, right? Well, he jumps off a box, climbing with his friends, and tweaks his knee a little, and then he thinks he might have a hernia from moving and do stuff. So man, I just tore his butt up. I was like, here's your life's dream. You're right here. I told you to just stay the course, and this is what you're going to do. And you're going to be so mad at yourself afterwards when you don't achieve your dream because you won't listen. You won't do the thing you know you're supposed to do, right? And so we're getting in it, and he goes, hey, Dad, this is all fear. You're afraid that I'm not going to get my dream. And I hear it for how you mean it.
Yeah.
You love me and you're scared for me. Right? Now, that took years of him learning me, right? And he goes,
Right.
Is that what you mean? And I said, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't affect me. I just want you to get what you dreamed about, right? I'm your parent. I carry your dreams, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, then let's leave it there, right? You're upset because of the circumstance. I made bad decisions, whatever. I get it. Are you actually mad at me? I was like, no. And he goes, okay. But that's from years of me telling him, repenting to him, and saying, hey, bud, I was scared when this happened. I was worried when this happened. I reacted this way when this happened, right? So that trained him to identify in me while I was trying to correct stuff in him. When you get worried about me, that's what it sounds like, sinfully. That's what it sounds like.
Right. But him seeing the kernel of care in your heart for him, I like that. I have one kid, and who I see tendencies that are like some of mine, and I'll often, when I see this kind of almost like what you might call narcissistic, like just like almost forgets that anybody else exists in the world, almost like they're playing like a video game and everything else is just like an NPC around them in a game. They're not actually like, they're the main character. And and they can finish the sentence like, if you keep doing this, if you keep living your life this way, how are you going to end up sad and lonely? I'm like, yeah, man, I don't want you to end up sad and lonely. I want you to be surrounded with people. And I'll say, like, you're gonna spend your life with the people you love. And if that's just you, then you're gonna spend your life with just you. But knowing that I went through, that was me in college when I didn't care about anybody else around me. And I was just worried about myself. And I was sad and lonely. It's like, man, I've seen where this goes. And so not projecting all of that onto them, but just that cautionary tale of like, man, I've played this, and I just love you too much to let you do this,
I think just one other subtle thing in there that made me think about when you said that, Michael, was just giving kids freedom to be able to ask a question. This doesn't always have to be a disciplining moment. Doesn't have to be a one-way street. Like, ask them to give them permission to ask you, questions about, does it have to be that way, or give them room to speak about what they were thinking, what they were feeling. Just letting them feel heard, because ideally, we want to be connecting with them, and that any kind of correction or discipline comes better with that connection, and so that giving them voice, letting them kind of say what they need to say, and have the freedom to that, and them knowing that you're going to listen to them, that you really do want to hear what they have to say helps. And so some of that other stuff, like to give me your eyes, your eye contact, and sometimes for little kids that might mean getting down on your knees, kind of at their level. So, I'm a little guy. I don't really think about like I'm this big imposing figure. But if you put a 2-year-old in that scenario, it's like, Well, all of a sudden, this little guy that's maybe 5'6", 5'7", with his shoes on, does kind of look big to a tiny kid. So just some of those things to keep in mind to kind of help give them voice and kind of help them connect with you a little bit.
I will say that is one of the habits that I would say that I've consistently have done well is the body language piece. It's I would say that 99% of the time when I correct my kids, I'm on the ground. I want to be eye level with them. I want to be able to look at them. I want to be able to see them well. Sometimes they're sitting with me, sometimes they're standing, but I want us to be right there. We're the same height, or they're standing and I'm crouched down looking up at them. Like I don't want this to be you're obeying because you're afraid of me. I want you to obey because you know that I love you and you're afraid of the consequences, but I don't want you just doing what I tell you to do because you're afraid that this big guy, and again, I'm shorter than Brian is, but again, if I'm a kid, I'm coming up to my, mid-thigh, it's like, that's a scary person to look up to. Who also lets you live in their house and controls how much food you have and all these things. Like, you're a scary person in some ways. It's like the fear of the Lord thing. Like, it's like, man, you control my existence right now. And I don't want you obeying out of a manipulative spirit from me where I'm towering over you and opposing myself. I want you to know I'm with you here. It's that body language piece is huge.
And one of the things I like about this book in general is just some of those habit things. Like, so that's, just kind of an easy habit thing. If we can kind of train ourselves to kind of pause and think about that and remember that when we're dealing with the kids, it's an easy habit. It's not a super spiritual thing.
No.
But let's just sit down on the floor and do it. And these things kind of go a little bit easier. And hopefully over time we don't really even think about like why we're doing it. It just kind of works. But it gives you a framework for everything else to kind of work properly.
It's now the norm for me too. So like if I'm talking to my kid and I'm standing up and they're sitting down, I feel weird. Like I feel like I have to sit down almost because it's just habit. It's become a habit. Now when Evangeline's taller than me in a couple years, it's going to be a little different. I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that. Maybe we'll just both stand up. But I might make her sit down so she's not towering over me. What about you, Ronnie? What habits? I know you mentioned the loving authority.
Yeah, I mentioned that one because it's always been an important one for me. But also I do the reconciliation piece. But I would also say the pausing sometimes. And there's something called the intent impact gap. Okay? We all have the greatest of intentions, but our impact may not match up. So there's that gap there, and in order to close that gap, we have to slow things down. We have to use what is called System 2 thinking, which is there any new information? It's not the regular off-the-cuff stuff, so that our intent can start matching our impact. And the whole thing is that eventually we'll get to the point where we consistently think that way because the average is you probably spend more time in System 1 thinking, which is this type of thinking, and reactionary and things like that. That's 98% of our thinking on an average. Could be 70 for you, could be 50 for me, could be 90 for you. But that other 2%, that's the one that we need. I believe that's an absolute. The one we should be considering when we're thinking.
I'm okay with that kind of absolute. Stopping and thinking about what you're doing, generally speaking, unless there's a kid about to get hit by a car. Like those are the absolutes that. I want to make a quick book recommendation, then I want you guys to be able to ask some questions too. Because I've been asking lots of them. This book, Childproof by Julie Lowe. Julie Lowe is a counselor and teacher of counselors with the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, CCEF. My wife got the chance to see her speak at a conference and said she was just the most refreshing and just caring and insightful person she's heard talk. Your back hurts? Yeah. What I love, there you go, body language. Good job, Mike. Applying. What I love about Julie's writing is this concept we've been talking about there aren't necessarily absolutes, and your kids are individuals, and how do you parent, not by some formula, because, we hate the prosperity gospel, where if you do these things, you'll get these results, right? We decry that, but you see us do that in other areas. You saw that with a lot of the purity culture when I was in high school. Like, if you walk in this way with regard to dating and sexuality, when you're married, marriage is going to look like this. Oh, I just do the things, and God gives me what I earn. Parenting, if you follow these steps, your kids will turn out great. It's like, man, That just ain't how it works. I can tell you and these guys, any of you who have multiple kids, I could do the same things with all of them and get very different results, right? You mix two, like one chemical with 3 different chemicals, you'll get very different results. What I love is how Julie takes those things into account and gets into like really like little specific things, not just like, all right, so talking about parenting from faith and freedom instead of from like a formula or fear-based. But then she talks about things like, what do you do when rules are broken? And then questions like, how do you parent a difficult child, an anxious child, a child with disabilities? When your kid says, I don't know. You ever had that before? When your kid says, I am bored. When your kid isn't thankful. Something's really specific. Like, how do I get to the heart of what's going on there? So I just love her attention to the heart, because parenting is counseling. It really is. We are counselors in our home, and Julie is an expert at counseling, and specifically counseling kids, which is a relatively, in the biblical counseling world, is a relatively still on the vanguard of how do we do this well. And I think she just does it excellently. She's great. So I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I will send it out in the email with links to buy it and whatnot. So get it. She's great. Any other, who's got questions? Or are y'all?
Just add one thing real quick, and this may go out in the email as well, but for any of you that are interested in more of the kind of trauma-related stuff, there were a couple of references in the chapter that he made to a couple of books that are really good too. That one of them is called The Whole Brain Child, and the other one is No Drama Discipline. So those are kind of some good resources too. And there's another book called The Connected Child.
And there's now The Connected Parent.
Oh, that's probably, I haven't read that. But so anyway, maybe we'll get some of those resources out too. But there's a lot of good stuff. And those deal more with just kind of what's going on in the brain, how some of those things work, some of those kind of things to help kind of get them in a spot physically to be able to react like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I'll say this because I've read those books because of foster parent training. I think that our culture has fallen in love with the words trauma and abuse and has probably inflated them too much. Right. That said, there's nothing in those books that I've read that hasn't been helpful also with my kids who I would not call traumatized or abused, as much as they may disagree on a given day. There are general principles of just treating a person like a person and understanding where they're coming from that are helpful. So, I highly recommend those books as well. I will send out links to these things. It's all.
Yeah, so I would say the combination of the two, like just that, some of that understanding and treating people as people in that way is good. But I would say combine it with something like this that has a little bit more of a biblical slant to it, because sometimes what those things don't take into account is, there is still sin at play in this too. And so somehow as believers, we've got to figure out how to, kind of bring that into the mix. But it does help in terms of like, here's some stuff I never thought about.
As Augustine said, all truth is God's truth. So there's nothing that's true in the world that scientists or psychologists or sociologists are going to figure out that is going to catch God by surprise or is going to disagree with something that he baked into the world. The world operates the world operates the way that God wanted it to operate when he made it. Obviously, sin corrupts that, but what is true, and God made it true. So, real quick, questions. Who's got questions? Anybody? I'm looking at Jim, but I'm not trying to single you out, Jim. You just happen to be right in front of me.
So if I can
Hold on. I'm going to give you this.
Oh, shoot, all right.
Now you're recorded.
So if I could recommend one thing, I really enjoyed this. The panel was awesome. You guys always had some phenomenal thoughts. And for me, I found like you would say something, and I was like, wait, I want to ask you a question on that. And then it goes on to the next person. I forgot my question. I had so many awesome questions throughout this thing that I completely forgot now. And there's a book my wife and I have been reading off and on that as we were talking, it's called Sacred Marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And so if, it goes to the premise that if marriage as a relationship is designed to make us holy, and I wonder if parenting is the same thing, us contending with our children. And it's kind of cool listening to you guys who have older kids, because my kids are 8 and 9, and I have no clue, because they haven't been 8 and 9 before. They've only been this age. Yeah. And I don't know what to do, because they're doing things they've never done before. And, my son was always my biggest fan, and now he's like, you're dumb. I'm like, what? wait, no, I'm awesome. Remember, no, and it's so weird, kind of like, because you don't know how to deal with these times. So listening to you have older kids, it's a lot better. I'm like, oh, it might actually get better. Like with your son, who looks back on reference points, which means I need a lot better reference points. Seriously, I need to do a lot more intentionality. So I'm learning more about the intentionality of parenting versus just lumbering through it, and really hoping in like 10 years they forget the bad stuff I did, and only think of the good stuff that I did. So yeah, it's been a phenomenal.
Gary Thomas, who wrote Sacred Marriage, does have a book on parenting. It's called
Yeah.
Sacred Parenting, and it's similar to Sacred Marriage. They turned Brian's mic way up because he's quiet. That's hilarious. At least, well, you held it by your face, unlike these guys. But Mike's a gesticulator. But it is much more in the vein of kind of like some of the stuff that Justin gets to here, which is, what if parenting is not just about disciplining our kids, but what if it's a model, a means of God discipling us? And I think you're right on there.
Yeah, I might have to get that book. All right.
Other questions? Anybody? Or y'all just have it figured out and y'all should have it.
Michael, you have a question. You're smart. You're like ridiculously smart.
So, in discussion of everything that y'all are mentioning, it sounds like there's a real balance we're trying to achieve between being someone that's like the leader of the household, the authority, and that kind of stuff, but also not being like too prideful in yourself when you go to discipline, because you're reacting in this kind of instinctual way, right? So to me, that's the real challenge all the time, is that like, how do I present myself as someone that's, in charge, and I'm a leader, and I'm trying to show this example, at the same time not take things like personally, that it's, like I'm like, it's an affront to me as a dad, or I feel upset emotionally because of like the challenges that we're going through with the kids at the time and stuff like that. How do you come back to that? I guess like the pause thing would be kind of where you would enact that kind of thing, as far as saying like, I'm trying to be the leader here, at the same time not feel, because okay, as an example, like when I think about my dad, when we talk about disciplining and stuff, he was a belt guy, and like when I look back, I'm like, I don't know, that I didn't like respect him for that, like I kind of hated him for that as I became an adolescent, and I don't, so like I want to avoid that, obviously, because I feel like he was doing that as a way to enact the revenge. Also because he felt like insulted, that we weren't respecting him. So like, I'm just curious, like, how do y'all parse that from leader also, but not taking it like personally and feeling, affronted?
Like maybe I should stay away from that, because that was the one that I had the hardest trouble with. The one that was the hardest for me. But I'm right there with you. And Michael can probably relate to this, raising a couple of boys that are older than my son. But somehow it kind of seems different for me with him, because it's kind of a different level. There's this thing in us as men that wants to kind of grow and find our independence and kind of, do our own thing. But when you were saying that, this scripture popped into my mind where, the centurion comes to Jesus and he said, "Will you heal my son?" And he's like, No, don't come under my roof. It's like, I'm a man under authority, and I have men under authority, under me. And so just what I hope to be able to do better is to just say, look, I know this it might feel like to you, I'm this authority over you, and I am, but understand this is a God-given perspective. So if I can take myself out of that, and the pride in me that wants to be in authority over him, and kind of take myself out of that and put it more back into a biblical perspective. Like Nick said, like, nothing in the world is outside of the way God designed it. And part of that design is for you to have a father and authority over you. And I'm not going to get it right every time. I was sitting down recently with Aaron Vogel having a parenting discussion. He's like, sometimes we just need to tell him, look, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's harder than work. It's harder than all this stuff. This trying to figure out how to parent and do it the right way is the hardest thing that I've ever had to try and navigate and figure out. And I'm not going to get it right all the time. But just know that I love you, and this is what we're working towards, and we're kind of, like Nick said, we're kind of walking this together. So I am an authority, but I'm not trying to not do that in a way to lord it over you. The scripture tells us not to do. But man, so what I'm hoping in terms of how to actually do that is to spend more time in that kind of pause and prayer stage. But I can't tell you I've got it figured out, because that's, like I said, I think that's a big part of what God's doing in me and I'm wrestling with right now.
Nick brought up the perspective of where the Lord is and where we are and they're here and we're right here. I think that's a piece that's important, is always conveying that you're on this road too, you're on this journey too, and this is not about me in the prideful sense, but I'm learning this, and I'm learning from the Lord on this as we both move through this. But I think that piece is where God is, where we are, and we meaning all of us. And I'm just a little bit of a rung above you, maybe, if you want to put it that way. But that's what I would do, and the pause does help. Did you have anything?
Yeah, no, reminding them of the biblical truth,
Yeah.
right? Like when they're little, you do the ABC Bible verses, right? And you can just tell them, I can still remember them all today, I think almost all of them. And just reminding them of this, but then being real and saying anecdotally, when I did that one time, oh, my dad was so disappointed. Or I did this and my friend was so hurt. Or I did this and I broke trust. Or do you remember when somebody did this to you? How did you feel? Yeah. When I moved from, and again, still doing this, right? Because I'm a big declarative statement guy. When I moved to asking questions about their experience or what they observed in me, the consequences of my actions, either relating to my wife or another kid or somebody else, or at work, a story I told where I did something, and then this is how I was perceived, seen, how I felt, did whatever. You can see them. They're kind of like, oh, you get what I just did. I do. I get it. Right? But if I'm busy and I just want to deal with the thing, there's no empathy there, and they're like, yeah, whatever, dude. Yeah. Oh, yell at me again, okay? Just that's what I would get. Right? Yeah, you should yell at me again. Go ahead. Right? And you get nowhere.
And hurry up and yell at me.
And you put a brick in the wall, right? Another brick. So I think just the pause is this. What do I have that's relatable to you? Yeah, I got to bring the gospel always, right? But what do I have practically for you that's going to touch your heart, right? If you have it.
Right.
And then you probably do. You've been through life, right? And relating that to them and asking, God, can you imagine what that felt like when you did that, said that? I remember this is what they told me. That, to me, has been the actual, they go off, right? Particularly as they get older, and they come back. And they're like, hey. And then you have the real conversation. So the conversation before the conversation is relatability. What comes afterwards when the Holy Spirit's active and working in them is come back. And if they don't come back, then you got to go up to their room or whatever, right? And you go sit down with them and be like, hey, did you think about what we talked about, whatever.
Yeah. The idea that, like, as kids, they're not going to run into any problem that we haven't run into in some flavor. It's like, when something breaks, you can YouTube it and figure out how to fix it. Because somebody else has had this problem. Hundreds of people, if not thousands, and at least one of them has made a YouTube video fixing it, or at least answered a question on a forum back in 2006. None of us are the absolute vanguard, right? And so I think the leader element here, I want all this bathed in Scripture, because, like Mike said, where there's no vision, the people perish. That's the verse you were looking for, right? Or they cast off restraint. Us having an idea of where our family's going, which is looking more like Jesus and loving him and loving his people, like that's the end goal. For y'all that were here for the for dinner discipleship, when I talked about planning, like my wife and I having a life plan helps in that we can be the leaders, and we can impart. We can show enough of that plan to our kids for them to get an idea of where we're going as a team. And that team element, like I said, is big for us. So we're all going someplace. I'm the leader. I'm not your boss. I mean, I get to tell you what to do because I'm your leader, but I'm not sitting here barking orders at you because I'm separate from this process. I am walking the path of sanctification with you. I'm a little ahead of you right now because I'm older than you. But man, I'm trying to get you caught up with me as much as possible. Right now, I'm 31 years ahead of Evangeline. But man, I hope, there's times, I had this conversation with Atticus recently, and I was like, man, I am so glad that you're figuring, it was about like time management stuff and like how to, I was like, I didn't get this stuff together until I was like 40, dude. If you can get this figured out when you're 15, he's 9 now. Like, man, like you're going to be so far ahead of where I was. Like, and that's what I want for you. Like, I want to be your leader, but eventually I want you to kind of ride the draft and then zip past me. Like, that's what I love to see for you. I want to see you grow. I want to see you flourish. I want to see you in the paths that God has for you. And I want you to follow my leadership and learn from my stupidity so you don't have to do that and go over those hurdles again, you know? That's the leadership piece, I think, that's huge. Any other questions?
One more comment on that. We're talking about discipline. You got to catch your kids doing something right.
Yeah.
You got to spend time paying attention to when your kids are doing something right. And you got to acknowledge that, and you got to celebrate that. I think that's important to the process, too. For me, it was.
Yeah, that is a big point. And that's an area where Terry's trying to help me to recognize even just little things. I mean, it doesn't have to be something big. Like we were talking about something the other day, even as much as a kid just not having a bad reaction to a no or something that they were, really wanted to do. And just for whatever the reason was, it's not something that you could do at that point. Maybe you just couldn't make it happen. But even something as little as that, just okay, Mom, okay, Dad, that was fine. Just acknowledging some of those things, because I think celebrating some of those things, letting them know that you see the good things too, and you're not just the correction guy, helps a lot. And another kind of related thing, if some stuff like isn't a big deal, if it's just a matter of preference for you or you don't feel like doing it, just try and be aware, because I tend to be probably more of a no guy than I should, just because that's kind of the way I grew up and just defaulted and didn't really think it through. But if it's just a matter of you saying no just because you're inconvenienced by it, you don't feel like it, think about where you can give them some more yeses, because that helps with that connection factor and that, hey, I'm in this with you. I'm just, trying a little bit ahead of you. I love his analogy of I want you to draft off of me until you can kind of, shoot past me. Those little yeses and the things where they say, all right, he's trying to kind of give me some of those things that I want. I think all of those little things along the way can kind of help to build some of that relationship that you're looking for.
You ever think happen where you're like, because I've done this, where you're like, they ask for something, you're like, no, I'm sorry, we can't really do that. And they take it well, and you're like, man, it's like, that was a really good reaction to that no. And they're like, does that mean I can do it now? It's like, no, still no.
Yeah, still no.
That's still a no.
But that was cool. That was cool.
No, that's exactly right. Catch it. Because remember, we are, you want some weight on you here. We're their picture of their Heavenly Father that they've got, That is, and man, do you want to paint a picture of them as a God that is constantly scolding, that is constantly finding fault and needling and nitpicking and never celebrating growth and never celebrating, never delighting? We have a very narrow picture of God we give him if we do that. And man, I don't want to be responsible for that, I'm never going to look exactly like God, but I'm going to strive to interact with them how I want my Father to interact with me,
And by way of encouragement, if I tell my boys I'm proud of them now, and they're 23 and 21, they always say thank you, which shows you how infrequent that probably was, because my thing was always, I expect excellence. If I hire you to do a job, I expect excellence. If you fall short, that's when you're going to hear from me. If you do a good job, well, hell, that's what I paid you for, right? I mean,
leave yourself room to be pleasantly surprised.
Right. No doubt about it, right? If I hired you, I did this, I'm willing to pay, right? I'm willing to do this, but I expect it to be just like I said it was going to be. And I didn't realize that I transported that into parenting and marriage, which was really fun for everybody. But with that, when the praise is normalized, when they expect the praise, then when the correction comes, it's so abrupt, it's so different. But I know they know you're for them because you've been encouraging. And so it comes in you're usually encouraging, coach, and now you're telling me I need to adjust something. I guess that means something really needs to get adjusted.
Versus if all they ever hear is correction,
All they ever hear is correction.
it just,
It's Charlie Brown's teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so we had something with a kid the other day where I pointed out to one of my kids, I said, I want you to notice something. When it comes time to volunteer for something, this one always says, I'll do it. And you always say they can do it. Right? And of course he was, can't believe you said that. Oh my God, rah, rah. And they might be out here right now. And so I said, no, listen, I'm not down on you. This is just an unattractive trait. I want you to pay attention that a boss will notice this. A coach will notice this. A prospective spouse will notice this.
Yeah.
Your kids will notice this. Like, this is something I feel is a fundamental thing that needs to change, right? Here's it. Okay, well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. You told me about it. So thank God the first, like right after this talk, I hear you, okay, something happened, and this kid walks up who's like 5 feet from the garbage can. I have my hand full of something. Like, can you just put that away for me? I got my hand, I'm in the middle, and I just looked. And they're like, fine. And I went and I said, but you caught it. But
Yeah.
You caught it. There you go. Good job. You said you weren't going to bring it up all the time. So then it started again. Then last night it was a fail, right? It was that one can do it. And I said, did you just hear what came out of your mouth? Listen to what you just said. Like, stop, pause. What did you just say? You said you weren't going to bring it up again.
like you brought it up
And
again.
the whole thing for me is realizing that back in the day, I was expecting them to be grateful for my coaching or parenting, too. And I
Right.
would get aggravated when they weren't like, oh, you're right, and that was great advice, and whatever. That's never going to happen. That will happen when they have kids, right? But the big thing is, yeah, I mean, if you correct it, the minute they do it right, praise it. Put water on it, fertilize it, right?
Yeah.
So that'll grow. But that's a big thing that I think we didn't talk about enough, yeah.
I've got one that has a tendency to correct the others. And when I watch them catch it, they'll start and then catch it. I'm like, good job.
Yeah.
Because I still saw it, so it's there, but we're working. There's growth.
It may always be there, right?
You
Yeah,
can't.
I mean, yeah.
And I had this conversation with somebody about just discipleship in general as believers. Be careful correcting anybody in a snapshot moment where you see. I use the example of Pete. For those of you who didn't know Pete 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Pete's old polo shirts are being used as tents by family in Uganda where Ronnie's brother's missionary. Pete was enormous. And if you saw Pete and were like, that guy's a little doughy, whatever, you don't realize the growth in this man's life, that he has shown growth in this area. Be careful with your kids, with your brothers and sisters in Christ, with your spouse. Be careful in the moments of, I saw you do this thing. It's like, you don't know how much they're fighting that thing. Again, like, take film strips. Don't take snapshots of people's lives, especially your kids.
That's really good because you don't only want to celebrate and encourage them in the end product, right? Because it takes us a while to get where we want to be, and the same is true for them. And so I can fall into that. It's like, all right, well, they still didn't do it right, versus, okay, that's like way better than they've done it before. So let's celebrate the progress. So that was really good.
It is the fruit of the Spirit, and it grows. It grows, and we are watching it grow and celebrate. Like, we get so excited when our satsuma tree flowers, and then you see the little bitty satsumas start. They're like this big. You're like, oh, look at them. And yes, some of them are going to fall off, but you get so excited. And then you see them bigger, and you're like, oh, look, that one's starting to turn a little orange. And, those moments of just excitement, like, celebrate those with your kids, Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one really quick question.
Yeah.
So this has been happening lately. This is an actual dad question, parenting question. I need advice.
Sure.
So for some reason, I'm working from home. My wife had heart surgery. She had a triple bypass, so she's at home. She's not always feeling like doing much with the kids. And at night, so we told my son, okay, look, if you get scared at night when you're laying down, you can come and lay in bed with me. Because my wife is sleeping in one bed, and I'm sleeping in this bed in the guest room, because she needs to sleep in a certain way. She needs to sleep propped up, and I don't sleep propped up and everything else. So one night was fine. My son came in, laid down. Second night, my son started to come in. My daughter woke up. Wait, where are you going? Why are you going there? We're all going to go into Dad's bed. I don't mind one child in my bed because I can basically sleep through that one child slipping in there. 2 kids, well, now you have to have 1 kid on each side of you. I sleep with a fan in my face, so I can't have the fan in my face now because kids here, kids there. I'm here now, in the middle child right there. I don't want to deter this because I want them to feel like they're safe with us and they're secure with us. But darn it, I need some more sleep because I got so little sleep last night because my son will get up and my daughter starts screaming, "Where are you going? You can't go to Dad's room. You're not scared yet," and everything else. Just insane. How do I correct this?
This feels like the sleepy time episode of Bluey. There's a Bluey episode for everything. It's the Bluey sleepy time episode. What if you get them to both come in on the same side of you, and then you like sneaky roll out and then go lay in their bed? Is that doable? I mean, it's crazy, but this is pure. This is not parenting. This is just.
Yeah, I would have to basically wake up and be far too cognizant and aware. But then once I'm without awake, I might not fall asleep again
That's
for
true.
a little while because it's hard for me to fall asleep anyway. I'm not like an easy sleeper. My wife will like lay down and boom. When she hits
Do you
the
know
bed-
why they're coming to bed? Is it?
I think, from what I've been surmising, and I've been praying about this, I think, and I told my wife, I think we need to take each of them ourselves and spend some time with them. Because we've all been spending time as a family. My wife was in the hospital. Ever since she got out of the hospital, we've been spending time together. And it's not really good time. It's just we're together. And we're busy, because I could tell you with the garbage that's been happening, but I won't. But we've been really busy.
Sure.
So there hasn't been a lot of quality, but there's been a lot of quantity. So I'm like, well, why don't I'll take the boy and you take the girl, and we'll all just go and spend a day together, just doing something that they like with just one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Because they seem to be trying to pick one of us and say, okay, I want to hang out with you, and I want to hang out with you. And I think it's just because there's no special time. There's a lot of time.
Yeah, but it's a wash.
Yeah.
Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think with mom getting sick or whatever, right, there's a lot of uncertainty injected into their life, right?
Yeah.
There's a big change. And so you're their big, safe, right, healthy guy, and just, dad smells good, dad, whatever, even though we don't smell good. But you know what I mean?
We smell like dad.
It's dad smell, yeah, and it's close to you and all that stuff. But I think it'd be important to just help them figure out, so it's not an irrational fear. Hey, pal, what's really going on? Like on the walk stuff. And I work from home now. I thought my time would be quality time. It's terrible. It's because I'm home, but I'm not home. I'm home, but I get aggravated if you interrupt or play the piano when I'm on the phone or crank TV when I'm on the phone or just decide to open the office door and have the dogs barking or whatever, And so it's not good time. So making that time to play volleyball with Annette, right? Making that time to be intentional driving Naomi to tennis. Making that time to say, hey, even if you don't want to go for a walk, we're going for a walk.
So am I taking your kids too now?
You want them? But I'm saying like so 2 things, right? One, the special time is so important, but I used to live for vacations thinking that would be enough. It's actually the day-to-day stuff, right? By way of encouragement, it really is the day-to-day. 5-10 minutes of doing whatever they want to do. It really makes them feel special. 2, what is the fear? Like, hey, pal, what are you really worried about? I mean, you keep ending up on my bed. I love you, right? Yeah. But tonight was taco night. You might want to sleep in. No, but I mean, But you can be funny with them and joke with them. But what are you really worried about? Because I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not sick. Mom's fine, right? She's here. Let's address the elephant in the room. Everything's fine, right?
Wow, that's really, really incredibly just deep and on point. I think that perhaps in some ways subconsciously they are afraid. My mom. Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't make me cry here, okay?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that look, and the only safety in that is that God has mom, and God has me, and God has you.
Yeah.
Number the hairs on our head, right? He knows our days. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? And all that, and you point them to Him because, man, you could be going in a car accident tomorrow.
Yeah.
right? And all they have is Christ. And so just kind of reaffirming that constant, that his underpinning, that his foundation is Christ.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And that whether mom comes to me or whatever, right? We're praying, we're counting on God to do this, but whatever it is, this is your foundation. I would just encourage you. I mean, I think that would be the spend time, your narrative should be that's the constant coat that you're putting on everything.
That is deep, man. Thank you.
him.
That made this whole day worthwhile. No, I'm joking. It was all good.
Yeah, good. And yeah, and I would say even just another thought in that regard, more practical. I'm not as deep as Mike is. If you have a good air mattress or something like that, go spend a night in their room. Just be like, hey, I come to you. You have your beds. I'm right here. I'm right with you. Like, I'm by your side. Just not exactly literally. So I can sleep and you can sleep and we're all going to sleep better. But you know when you wake up, you can look over and Dad's right there. That could be really helpful too.
There was actually, I think Gary and Lisa might have given us a CD years ago. Somebody did, and I never returned it, but I never returned it. But there was,
I think he loaned it to me, actually. I think I have it.
there was some old guy talking about parenting, right? And he said, people say, I can't stand my kids. He said, well, train them till you like them, and all that stuff, that guy. Well, one of the things he said is whenever there's a rift or something's wrong in the family or you don't feel close to your kids or whatever's going on, he said, having everybody sleep in the same room, like a big sleepover in the den or whatever, he goes, I don't know why this works, but it works.
That's good.
You feel closer. Proximity makes people feel closer, and he said it. We've done it for years and counseled families, and they do it. And for whatever, it just works.
And I'm a big champion for read aloud. I love read aloud time. It's like one of my things. I just bought a book of like a book journal that we're going to go through and write all the things that we've read and rate them. We're just like really excited about it. But laying in that bed next to them, reading aloud to them until they fall asleep or until if they don't fall asleep, it's like, all right, we've hit a chapter point, and then just transitioning that time. I think that can be really beautiful for you guys, honestly. All right. We're going to wrap it up, guys. I'm going to pray for us real quick before Ronnie goes. I got to make sure you prayed for, or else I'm not responsible for you. Lord, thank you for these wise men. Thank you that you are the wise God who speaks truth into our lives, Lord, that all we're talking about here is the practical ways of implementing the truths of loving headship that you've placed us in our families. Lord, help us to help our kids to know both those things, that we love them and that we lead them. Lord, we are honored and overwhelmed by the difficulty of this task, Lord. We need you to do this well. We need to be parented by you. We need to be shaped by you. We need to walk in the fruit of the Spirit of love and joy and peace and patience and all the rest with our children. And we know that we can only do that as your Spirit fills us and empowers us to do those things, Lord. I pray for these men as they go home to their families, Lord, that they can lead them well, they can shape them well, and that when moments of correction and redirection come up, Lord, that you would supernaturally give them grace and strength to handle those things in a way that brings fruit in their children's lives and fruit in their own lives. God, that is what we want more than anything else, Lord, so that you are most glorified, because you are glorified by the fruit of our lives, Lord. So help us to grow that fruit and honor the gardener who's growing it, Lord. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, guys.